This is my standard disclosure. I work with NGOs, I work with industry, and I also pester the FDA. So here's my first slide. This is what I want you to take home first. Chemicals in food are regulated in the U.S. We may not like what we see, but they are regulated in the U.S. by the Food and Drug Administration. We have a strong safety standard for chemicals added purposely on food or that get into the food supply that is called reasonable certainty of no harm. Basically, the chemical is considered unsafe until it's shown to be safe. So you are guilty until you're proven to be innocent. Unlike the EPA-regulated chemicals, to add a chemical to the food supply, you have to show that it's safe. And the safety assessment is based on risk and is not based on hazard. So, as I said, the law passed in 1958. It requires affirmation of safety and testing before chemicals are used in the food supply. And it was intended to protect the public health. And it had two main purposes. To, protect the health of consumers, but also to advance food technology. So, the definition of a food additive is complicated. Basically, a food additive is something that is not an animal drug, a color additive, a grass substance, etc., etc. So this is a very long definition, but it includes those chemicals that are purposely added to food, like the ingredients that you see in a list of a food that you buy in the supermarket, but also includes packaging chemicals and any chemicals that get into the food through the manufacturing process. So yesterday you may have seen this, I already presented it, but this is what I want you to take home too. Everything that is happening before the food gets to the supermarket, those chemicals are also regulated by FDA and are also considered food additives. So again, the law was great at developing and advanced food technologies. In 1958, there were less than 1,000 chemicals around, and now we have more than 10,000. So, mission accomplished. Now, let's talk about protection of public health. We have an interesting discussion when you look back at the history of the legislation before the law was passed. It was all about preventing harmful effects in consumers. In consumers that are exposed to these chemicals for months or years or decades. They were concerned about chronic health effects, not acute poisons, and they were concerned that people are exposed to multiple chemicals at the same time. So these three things were discussions that happened in the mid-1950s. So again, a chemical must be safe before it's used in food. And as I said, the safety standard is reasonable certainty of no harm, is based on a risk assessment, and if a chemical is known to cause cancer in a man or animal, must not be used in food. And what was interesting here is that it's written in the law, Congress demanded FDA that considers three things when they look at the safety assessment of a chemical. First, is there exposure? If there is no exposure to the chemical, the risk is very, very, very low. Second, there has to be some safety factors added to the assessment because the data is never perfect. And the third one is what is right there in the middle. They added this requirement that is to consider the cumulative effect of substances in the diet that are chemically related or pharmacologically related. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that particular requirement because that is the first shortcoming that I want to discuss with you today. So what does this mean to consider the cumulative effect of a substance in the diet? So FDA wrote a regulation in the 1970s that says that food additives that cause similar or related pharmacological effects will be regarded as a class, and in the absence of evidence to the contrary, will have additive toxic effects. So that is kind of revolutionary. That's what we are talking about now. mixtures, chemicals, cumulative effects, and additive effects. That is in the 70s. So just to give you an example, if chemicals affect the thyroid gland, this is just a very short list of chemicals known to the FDA that are listed in their database for direct additives. So these are ingredients that would be displayed in a food package. All those affect the thyroid gland. So based on this regulation of the road, those chemicals should be considered together. Should be considered that have an additive effect on the function of the gland and regulated as a class. But FDA has not followed the law, the requirement, has not followed its own regulations, doesn't have guidance on what a pharmacological effect means, and the risk assessment continues to be done one chemical at a time. So here's the second shortcoming, and this is a loophole that has swallowed the law, that you can drive a truck through that loophole. So the first part, what is in black, is what I told you is the definition of a food additive. But it continues. It is a food additive if the substance is not generally recognized among experts to be safe under the conditions of its intended use. So this is the generally recognized as safe exemption. It was an exemption that worked really well. It was meant to be for vinegar and oils and salt and sugar, things that were known not to cause harm in not abundant quantities like sugar or salt, but they were used for decades and they were considered safe. So why would a manufacturer of olive oil have to have a toxicity test for the olive oil? But that is not how it has been interpreted. I don't have the time to show you, but I want you to look at those two links. The Public Integrity Organization had a fantastic expose on the grass problem. And there's a wonderful video that they put together. It's 3 minutes long. We don't have the time to do it, but I recommend you to fully understand the craziness of the grass loophole. That is a very American thing. So again, this grass loophole, as I say, was intended for common ingredients, but both FDA and industry has stretched it to levels that are hard to describe sometimes. So nowadays, pretty much all substances, all chemicals that are used as ingredients go through this loophole. And there is no requirement for the industry, for the companies that make that ingredient, to tell the FDA what they are doing. So that's the main issue. There are ingredients that are determined to be safe for human consumption in secret, without telling the agency, without public knowledge, with no publication of the safety assessment. So we have an estimate of 1,000 chemicals that have been self-determined to be grass, but I think that is a very small number. And even food packaging chemicals can be determined to be grass with no knowledge by the agency or the public. The third shortcoming is the outdated science that FDA is using to determine safety of chemicals. This is just for food packaging. Jane mentioned briefly this morning that there are these thresholds and tiers of exposures, and that correlates with how much toxicity data the agencies need. In this case, if I am the manufacturer of a packaging chemical and I estimated that the cumulative exposure in humans is less than half parts per billion, the agency doesn't expect me to submit any kind of toxicity data. Nothing. For the next tier, that is up to 50 parts per billion of cumulative exposure, genetic toxicity is recommended. Again, the agency doesn't require anything. It recommends toxicity studies or toxicity data. They would like to have it, but you're not obligated to provide it. You can provide way more than this, and they will be happy. But if you just provide genetic toxicity data, that is sufficient for that second tier. So the higher your estimate on the exposure, the more information you need to provide. But if I am the manufacturer of a chemical, why would I be making estimates of higher exposures? So again, this is the problem. This questionable assumption that low exposures is toxicologically insignificant is a problem that generates tremendous data gaps. This is a paper that we published in 2013 that Leo Trasandi alluded to yesterday. Basically, when it comes to food contact substances, we have documented that less than 27% have a published study showing that the chemical was fed to a rat, to even see if it did that right, they died or not. So there is this concept embedded into the regulator's mind that there is something called toxicologically insignificant, that low levels don't do anything. By now we know better. So this is a quote from a regulator looking at the safety assessment of a PFAS substance. And they said basically, based on the lack of exposure to the food contact substance and the lack of new exposure to impurities, there is expected to be toxicologically significant. It's not expected to be toxicologically significant. So they play both ways, toxicologically insignificant and toxicologically significant, neither of which has been explained. We don't know what they mean. And this is taken from a notification by a company. I think this one was DuPont, or Chemours in this case, for a polymer made of PFAS. So, lucky for me, FDA didn't redact this table. But if you see there, those are the list of impurities and the exposures that the company estimated people will be exposed to from that PFAS. If you look at the column that says DC for dietary consumption, you have a bunch of PFAS people consuming, or in the estimate of Chemours in this case, like 200 parts per trillion of the oligomers that are PFAS oligomers. You have P4 listed there as well, like at 1.5 parts per trillion. So we are exposed to a bunch of PFAS just from this particular product. And that is something that companies keep very quiet. They don't like to reveal what are the impurities because that give away the type of manufacturing process and informs competitors, etc., etc. So, as you can see, there are all these issues. An outdated law with a huge loophole, an outdated science. So this is my second take-home message. That, again, the FDA has the authority to regulate the safety of chemicals in food. It's not that we have unregulated chemicals in our food. But there is a lack of full implementation of the law that is quite strong. They have ignored their own regulations that, as you saw, the language is quite strong. And unfortunately, we have this loophole that has reduced the confidence of people in food safety. So this is our therefore. As a group, we need legislative changes in the law. We need administrative changes just to close that loophole. We need to update the risk assessment framework. The science needs to be modernized, and we need to include approaches to mixture toxicity and cumulative effects. And this is, in my view, one of the most important ones. That is, we need to develop a post-market system to figure out whether the chemicals that were approved decades ago are still safe. Nowadays, the system is we approve a chemical and it's safe in 1972, and it's going to be safe forever. There is never a look back. And that's all. Thank you.